I don't remember the music. Only the sound of my heels echoing across marble too cold for a ceremony meant to unite two lives. The chapel was beautiful, I suppose. Vaulted ceilings, chandeliers heavy with crystals, and long rows of guests who didn't dare meet my eyes. It wasn't a wedding. It was a transaction dressed in ivory. I was 24, still sewing dresses in a backroom studio on South Dearborn Street, when my father called me home with trembling hands and eyes that wouldn't meet mine. He told me in clipped whispers about the debt, about the man who could erase it, and about the only price he would accept. Me. My name is Lena Tran. I was a virgin when I married Ethan Blackwell, a stranger with eyes like slate and a reputation, carved out of ice. We signed the papers under the dim light of that church, surrounded by lawyers instead of love. I barely remember the vows, only the sound of Ethan's voice, steady, impersonal, like he was closing a merger, not marrying a woman he'd never once touched. There was no kiss. I had never seen someone so controlled. He didn't look at me when he slipped the ring on. He didn't even glance my way when the officiant declared us husband and wife. And somehow, that absence of recognition, that emptiness in his gaze, burned deeper than any cruelty. I don't exist to him, I thought. I'm a solution, nothing more. The ride to his home was long and silent. His driver kept his eyes fixed forward, the city lights blurring into streaks of white and red as we climbed north toward the lake. When the iron gates finally opened, caught my breath. The estate looked like something pulled from an old novel. Stone, wood, and glass, surrounded by bare trees and too much silence. Winter hadn't come yet, but the air already felt sharp. He didn't help me from the car. Inside, the warmth was deceptive. Polished wood floors gleamed under soft amber lighting. The scent of sandalwood lingered in the halls, thick and haunting. I followed him through corridors that felt more like a museum than a home. He stopped at a wide door and opened it without looking back. "This is your room." I stepped inside. It wasn't a room. It was a world. High ceilings, dark oak furniture, and a bed too large for one person, too symbolic for two who didn't know each other. I stood in the doorway for a moment, not moving. He spoke again, his voice unreadable. "We share the room. That was part of the agreement. But I won't touch you unless you ask me to." Then he left. Not cruel, not kind, just gone. That night, I sat at the edge of the bed for hours, still in the wedding dress, staring at the untouched pillows. The silence hummed, interrupted only by the ticking of a vintage clock on the mantel. It was almost midnight when I finally moved. I changed into a cotton nightgown and lay on the very edge of the bed, curled inward, as far from the other pillow as possible. I felt his presence long before I heard him return. The door opened with a gentle click. Footsteps. Then the quiet shifting of sheets as he lay down beside me, fully clothed. We didn't speak, and somehow the space between us felt louder than any fight could have. I stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours, my heart pounding too fast, my body too aware. I'd never shared a bed with anyone. And now, the man beside me was a stranger who owned the deed to my future. Eventually, I closed my eyes. But sleep didn't come. At some point, when the house was fully asleep, I slipped out of bed. My suitcase sat half unpacked in the corner, next to a small wooden chest I hadn't touched in years. I opened it without thinking. Inside, folded neatly between the pages of my mother's old prayer book, was a letter I'd forgotten. Her handwriting. Curved. Soft. The way she used to write grocery lists when I was a child. I brought it closer to the lamp and began to read. Lena. My girl. If you ever find this letter, It means life has brought you to a choice you didn't ask for. Maybe your father couldn't tell you the truth. Maybe Ethan never will. But the man you're marrying, he once knew someone very dear to me, more than you know. And if he chose to keep you close, it might not be out of coldness. It might be a debt of a different kind. I read it again. And again. And suddenly something inside me shifted. Why had Ethan agreed to this marriage? Why me? Why now? My father had never mentioned the details, only the desperation. But now, this letter, these few lines from a mother whose voice I hadn't heard in months, planted a seed I couldn't ignore. Ethan once knew someone dear to her. Someone tied to me. And perhaps that meant this marriage wasn't just a contract after all. I folded the letter slowly, my hands trembling just enough to feel it. Then I turned off the lamp, slid back into bed, and listened to the quiet rhythm of Ethan's breath, still distant, still silent. But suddenly the space between us didn't feel as final as it had before. It took me 3 days to unpack, not because I didn't have time. I just couldn't bring myself to settle. Every folded blouse, every worn book from my childhood shelf felt like a quiet betrayal, as if admitting that I now belonged here. The bed remained our only shared space. Ethan came and went like a shadow, rising before dawn, returning after I'd shut off the lights. We never touched. We barely spoke. But the space between us, wide, deliberate, held more weight than the silence itself. That second night, I lay staring at the ceiling again, the soft rustle of sheets his only proof of presence. I memorized the sound of his breathing. Steady, distant, like someone trained not to feel. I used to think sharing a bed was intimate, that it meant something. But ours felt more like a quiet war zone. Each of us clinging to our sides, not in fear, but in resignation. Still, something shifted after I read my mother's letter. I couldn't unknow it. The morning after, I walked into the sunroom, a glass-walled chamber facing the edge of the woods. Ethan was already there, reading the Financial Times, his expression carved in stone. He didn't look up, not even when I greeted him quietly. So I sat, across the room, close enough to study him, far enough to stay invisible. He wore navy blue, today, a crisp shirt, sleeves rolled to the forearms, revealing a watch that probably cost more than my father's entire business. But his eyes, they stayed locked on the paper. We sat in silence until he finally folded the paper and stood. "I've arranged for a car to take you to visit your mother today," he said without looking at me. "She's at Mercy General." I blinked. "You... what?" His tone remained flat. "She was transferred last week, private care, better facilities." I hadn't been told, and in that moment, I realized something that left my throat tight. He had moved her, quietly, without credit, without ever intending to tell me. "You arranged that?" I asked. He only nodded once, then turned away. That afternoon, I sat beside my mother's hospital bed, brushing strands of hair from her forehead while she slept. The room was warm, brighter, smelled faintly of lavender oil and clean linen. "She's been calmer here," a nurse told me. "The doctor said the medication's been adjusted. Someone made sure she got the new treatment plan quickly." I swallowed, the knot in my throat. "Do you know who arranged it?" I asked. The nurse smiled. "Your husband, I think. He didn't leave a name, but he covered everything in advance, even the flowers. A bouquet of chamomile and white roses sat by the window. My mother's favorite. He had known that. Somehow. When I returned to the estate that evening, I didn't go straight to my room. I went to the kitchen. The staff barely acknowledged me. I liked it that way. Less questions, I made tea the way Mama used to, boiling water over jasmine leaves, letting it steep in silence. My hands moved on instinct, memory guiding them more than thought. I carried 2 cups up the winding stairs and knocked softly on his study door. He opened it a second later, shirt sleeves rolled back, hair slightly tousled. Not the Ethan Blackwell from the wedding photos. Just a man who hadn't eaten dinner yet. He looked surprised. "I made tea," I said simply, holding out a cup. He stared at it, then at me. Then he took it. "Thank you," he said, softer than I expected. We didn't speak after that. I left my own cup untouched on the hallway table and returned to our shared room, unsure if I'd crossed a line or if I'd finally been seen. That night, I lay on my side again, facing the window. The sheets were cold. I thought about the way his fingers brushed the rim of the teacup when I handed it to him. The way his eyes softened, just for a moment, when he said thank you. And for the first time since I arrived, the silence between us didn't feel hostile. It felt tentative, like the space wasn't meant to keep us apart, but to give us room to breathe. On the 4th night, I woke to find the bed empty. It startled me. I rose slowly, clutching the blanket around my shoulders, and padded quietly down the hallway. Light spilled from under the library door. I pushed it open gently. Ethan sat on the floor, barefoot, a blanket draped around his shoulders. Before him lay a small stack of letters, yellowed, creased. My mother's handwriting. He looked up, startled, but didn't move to hide them. "Where did you get those?" I whispered. "They were in my father's things," he said. "Your mother wrote him a long time ago." My breath caught. "You knew her?" He nodded slowly. "I was 12 when she came to our home," he said. "She brought your father to ask for help. My father turned them away. I never forgot her face." He looked down. "I didn't marry you for money. Or for revenge. I married you because I owed her something. And because I thought, if I kept you close, I could at least protect what she loved." My throat burned. There were no words that fit the shape of that confession. I stepped forward, slowly. The blanket slipped from my shoulders, and for the first time, I sat beside him, close enough to feel the heat of his skin, close enough to know that the bed we shared was no longer a line drawn in resentment. It was a beginning. I stayed with him on the floor for a long time that night. Neither of us spoke after his confession. The room was quiet, save for the slow tick of the antique clock in the corner and the wind brushing against the tall windows. The kind of quiet that doesn't ask to be filled. He didn't look at me again, not even as I sat down beside him. Knees drawn up, palms resting on the carpet between us. I didn't need him to. Sometimes the silence said more. I picked up one of the letters, its paper brittle, corners curled like dry leaves. My mother's handwriting curved gently across the page, like the way she used to trace my back with her. Fingers to soothe me to sleep. That same grace lived here, in ink faded but fierce. "Please, Robert, he has a daughter now. If you won't help him for yourself, help him for her. She's only 2. And she smiles just like you." The room shifted. I read the sentence again. Then a third time. Ethan watched me without blinking. "You knew," I whispered. He nodded. "Not at first, but when I saw your name in the agreement, I remembered. I put it together. I held the letter with both hands, though it trembled in my grip. My mother wrote this to your father?" "Yes." "Robert Blackwell." He nodded again. "And I believe you're his child," he said gently. "Your father," The man who raised you, he may have been her partner, but Robert was something else. My stomach twisted, as if the ground beneath my feet had cracked open. In a single breath, the shape of my life shifted. The quiet man who'd raised me, always tired, always burdened. Was he only a guardian of a secret? And Ethan, sitting across from me in the dim light, now held a tie to my mother stronger than I ever imagined. I think she was protecting you, he added. From scandal. From the truth. Maybe from the Blackwell name. I tried to speak, but couldn't find the words. I wasn't supposed to marry you, he said, more to the shadows than to me. But when your father approached me, I saw the name, the timing, and I remembered her. I looked at him, really looked, past the suits, the silence, the sharp edges. I saw the boy who had watched a woman plead at his father's doorstep and never forgot her. I saw a man who built his empire on control but married me out of obligation and something closer to grief. Why didn't you tell me? He was quiet for a long time. Because you didn't choose any of this, he said, and I didn't want to hurt you with history you never asked for. I turned my eyes back to the letter. I wondered if my mother ever thought I'd read it, if she hoped the truth would come out one day, or feared it might. The next morning, I visited her again. She was awake, brighter than usual. Her fingers clutched the edge of the blanket, thin and freckled. She smiled when she saw me. Your cheeks look fuller, she said. Marriage suits you. I almost laughed, but it came out wrong. Mama, I said softly. Did you know Ethan's father? The smile faded, slowly, like a candle burning down. She looked at me carefully, measured, then nodded. We were young, she said. I was foolish. I waited. I didn't tell your father, she added. The man who raised you loved you more than anything. He never questioned it. And Ethan? I asked. Did you know we'd... She shook her head. I never imagined. Life has strange circles. I reached out and took her hand. It was cold. I'm not angry, I said. Just unmoored. She closed her eyes, as if the weight of the years pressed gently against her lids. You're strong, she said. You always were. Stronger than I was. I didn't feel strong. I felt like a girl learning her own name again. When I returned home, Ethan was already there. In the dining room, sleeves rolled, coat tossed over a chair. He looked up when I entered, and for once, didn't lower his gaze. You saw her? I nodded. She told me enough. He waited for more. I let the silence linger. Then I said, You never owed me anything, Ethan. Not really. He set down the glass in his hand. I know. Then why did you do it? His answer came slow, measured. Because there are very few things in life that leave marks you don't see. She was one of them. And you reminded me of her. I walked closer. My footsteps echoed in the grand space. She loved deeply, I said. I know, he replied. She was scared most of the time. I know that too. I stopped a few feet from him. But she never gave up on the people she loved, even when they didn't deserve it. He looked up, met my eyes fully for the first time. His voice was rough. Do you? Do I what? Do you give up easily? I thought of the years I spent believing love had to be earned through sacrifice, the hours by my mother's bedside, the quiet meals, the threadbare couch, and now, this house, grand but aching. No, I said. I don't. His jaw shifted, as if something in him wanted to bend but didn't know how. Then he said the smallest, most dangerous thing a man like him could say. I don't know how to love you, but I want to learn. I stood there, heart hammering, not because of the words, but because of the honesty. I don't need you to love me yet, whispered. Just don't walk away from me. He nodded, and for the first time, the bed between us felt less like a wall and more like a place we might someday belong. There's something sacred about making tea. Not the act itself, but the rhythm of it, how your hands remember what your mind can't quite name. The warmth of porcelain, the curl of steam rising from leaves that open like secrets in water. It reminds me of my mother. She used to hum when she brewed tea. A melody I never knew the name of. One that sounded like rain against a window, or breath between sobs. She said tea wasn't about flavor. It was about attention. You don't make tea for yourself, she used to say. You make it for someone you want to stay. That morning, I made 2 cups. One for her, even though she wasn't there, and one for Ethan. I found him in the sunroom again, barefoot, shirt untucked, as if the night had stripped away the armor he usually wore. Light streamed across the wooden floor, soft and gold, catching the tired edges beneath his eyes. He didn't speak as I handed him the cup, but his fingers brushed mine, just barely, and it felt like more than contact. It felt like memory forming. He sat across from me, and we drank without words. For once, the silence didn't ask for explanation. After a while, he set his cup down and looked out toward the woods. I hated him, you know, he said quietly. My father, for how he treated your mother. I said nothing. I built everything I have to prove I didn't need him, that I could be something else. Did it work? I asked. He glanced at me. Some days. And the other days? He hesitated. I see his face in the mirror. I didn't flinch. Instead, I reached across the small table and placed my hand over his. It was a small gesture, but it held the weight of 1,000 withheld ones. I see my mother in mine, I said softly. Even the parts I'm afraid of. We sat there, 2 people raised by ghosts, trying to build something that resembled a home. That afternoon, I brought fresh tea to the kitchen, where Mrs. Lowell, the housekeeper, was folding linens. She smiled gently as I entered, like someone watching a child finally grow into their shoes. Have you settled in, dear? She asked. I hesitated. I think I'm learning how. She nodded, then looked at me carefully. He sleeps better, now, since you arrived. I blinked. You notice that? I notice everything in this house, she said, not unkindly. He hasn't let anyone close in a very long time. Not since... She stopped. Since who? I asked. Before she could answer, the kitchen door opened. A woman entered, tall, elegant, with dark hair and the kind of posture that made rooms pause. She wore a navy coat and carried an expensive leather bag. Her eyes, sharp and gray, immediately landed on me. I see you've redecorated, she said dryly, scanning the tea set. Very domestic. Mrs. Lowell stiffened. Miss Blackwell, she said. We weren't expecting you. I gathered. She turned back to me. You must be the new wife. I stood, my hands still warm from the teapot. I'm Lena. She arched an eyebrow. Of course you are. I'm Claire, Ethan's sister. The room shrank. Her gaze swept over me, not cruelly, but clinically, like she was trying to measure my worth without touching it. Funny, she said. He never mentioned your name, or your existence. I swallowed, steadying myself. It was a quiet wedding, Claire smirked. Apparently. Then Ethan appeared. He entered without haste, but his eyes sharpened the moment he saw her. What are you doing here? He asked. I was in town. she said lightly. Thought I'd visit the brother who vanished into marital bliss without a word. His jaw tightened. We're not doing this, he said. Claire shrugged. No need to get dramatic. I just wanted to meet the woman you married, and perhaps understand why. She looked back at me. You don't belong here, she said. Not unkind, but certain. This house eats people like you. I opened my mouth, then closed it. Ethan stepped between us. That's enough. Claire sighed, almost amused. Protective. That's new. Then to me. Good luck, Lena. If you need a lawyer in 6 months, call me. She left with the grace of a woman used to winning arguments no one else could play. The silence she left behind was thick. Ethan turned to me. Apology. Flickering in his expression, I should have warned you. You don't have to explain her to me, I said. But you should tell me what she meant. He leaned against the counter, arms folded. She thinks I married you to spite her, or our father, or the company, maybe all of them. And did. You? His eyes met mine. I married you because I owed a woman more than words could repay. But staying married. His voice softened. That's something I choose. Every day. I looked at the teacups. Still warm. Then choose again, I said. And I'll keep making tea. He nodded once, as if sealing a pact neither of us fully understood yet. That night, I returned to the bedroom late. The sheets were turned down, the light beside the bed glowed amber, and on my pillow was a folded note. Just a line. You don't have to stay on your side anymore. I held the note in both hands for a long time, heart thudding gently against my ribs. Then quietly, I slipped under the covers. Not pressed against him, but closer. Close enough to feel that I wasn't alone. Not anymore. Trust doesn't break all at once. It cracks slowly. Soft sounds you don't hear until the silence feels different. The morning started like any other. Ethan had already left for his office downtown before I woke. The house was quiet, light filtering through the tall windows of our room. I made tea, fed the garden finches with breadcrumbs from the kitchen, then visited my mother, who was sitting upright for the first time in days. Her eyes lit up when she saw me. You look rested, she said. I think I am. She smiled, but her hands were still trembling when she reached for her cup. Has he told you he loves you yet? She asked, without warning. I froze. My hand paused midair, holding the honey spoon. No, I answered honestly, but I think he's trying. She sipped quietly, then whispered. That's sometimes more important. I stayed with her until late afternoon. Then I went to the cafe on 11th Street, the one I used to work at during school. I hadn't planned on running into anyone. But fate doesn't ask for permission. My cousin Min was already at the corner table. He looked up, startled. Lena? I forced a smile. Hi. He gestured to the empty seat. Sit, please. I hesitated. Min had always been half friend, half warning, clever with words, careless with people. We hadn't spoken since the wedding. I never told him why I left everything behind. He didn't ask. Married to a Blackwell now, huh? He said, stirring his espresso with theatrical flair. That's quite a leap. I kept my hands in my lap. It wasn't a choice. Isn't it always? His tone was light, but his eyes were sharp. Min was the kind of person who could plant doubt like a seed and make you water it yourself. He's good to my mother, I said gently. And to you? I looked down. He's trying. He nodded slowly, like someone pretending to understand. Then he leaned in. Just be careful, Lena. That family, Blackwells, they don't let anyone in unless they plan to use them. That night, I returned to the estate with a strange weight in my chest. Ethan wasn't home. I wandered the library, then the sunroom, finally ending up in the kitchen, fingers tapping against the empty teacup on the counter. I was startled when I heard voices from the hallway. Ethan had returned, and he wasn't alone. I stepped quietly closer. "She's not what you think," I heard a woman say. The voice, it was Claire. She's soft, emotional. That kind of woman doesn't survive here. Ethan's voice was clipped. "You don't know her." "I know her type. Sweet, but strategic." Her cousin was just at my office, asking questions. About your will, about the company. My heart dropped. "What cousin?" Ethan asked, cold. "Min something." He said he was family. A pause. Ethan didn't answer. I didn't wait to hear more. I left. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my side of the bed, my back to the door, the sheets twisted around my ankles. Ethan didn't come in. Morning came in shades of gray, rain tapping gently on the window panes. He entered without a word around dawn. I kept my eyes closed, pretending. He sat on the edge of the bed, not touching me. "I didn't believe her," he said, voice low. "But I had to be sure." I opened my eyes. "So you checked?" He looked down. "I checked." I sat up slowly. "Did you find anything?" I asked. "No," he said. "Nothing. Because there's nothing to find." A long silence. "Then why does it still hurt?" I whispered. He exhaled, pressing his hands together. "Because I was afraid. Not of you. Of losing what I was starting to want. That stunned me more than anger would have." "What are you starting to want, Ethan?" His voice barely carried. "Peace. Quiet. You." He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Real, human fear. "I don't know how to hold on to good things," he said. "I only know how to protect myself from them." I reached across the bed, just like I had in the sunroom, and touched his hand. "You don't need to protect yourself from me." He closed his fingers around mine, and for the first time, we sat at the center of the bed, together. Not as strangers sharing space, or people with contracts and quiet regrets, but as two tired souls meeting in the only place they could both still breathe. That evening, I returned to my mother's hospital room. She was sleeping. I sat beside her and wrote a letter, folding the paper like she used to when she wrote to herself. I didn't write about pain or betrayal. I wrote about trust, how it builds, fails, and tries again, how sometimes the people who disappoint us are the ones who need love the most. I placed it in her nightstand. Someday, I'd give it to Ethan, but not yet. Tonight we'd start with tea and stay on the same side of the bed. Hospitals have their own kind of silence. Not the soft quiet of a library or the content hush of evening tea. No, this one was heavier. Like grief had walked the halls for too long and worn the floors smooth. I pressed the call button as soon as the monitor beeped. My mother's breath had grown shallow sometime around midnight. I'd been sitting beside her since dinner, watching the lines on the screen like a prayer I didn't know how to say. When the nurse entered, I stood. Too fast. My knees buckled. "She's stable, but we're moving her to intensive care," the nurse said gently. "There's a specialist on the way." I nodded. I couldn't speak. Not yet. "I'll contact your husband," she added. And for a moment, that word, husband, felt heavier than the news. Ethan had been quieter since the confrontation with Min. Not distant, but more careful. We still shared tea each morning, still sat in the sunroom some evenings, our fingers brushing, eyes lingering, just a second longer than necessary. But we hadn't said the word love, We hadn't needed to. Not yet. Still, when he arrived at the hospital 30 minutes later, out of breath and without a coat, I didn't expect the look in his eyes. He looked scared. Not for my mother. For me. I should have come earlier, he said, brushing damp hair from my face. You didn't know, I said, voice shaking. I should have known anyway. The words didn't matter. Only the fact that he was there. That his arms were warm around me in the middle of a sterile, flickering hallway. That I didn't have to carry this alone. She stabilized by morning, but the specialist had news. She needed extended care. Months, not weeks. A treatment center out of state. The best one. But it wasn't covered. Not fully. I knew the numbers. They were impossible. I sat on the hospital's rooftop terrace alone later that day, the wind tugging, gently at the hem of my coat. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink much. I just stared at the skyline, wondering what else I could give. My time? Already hers. My name? Already changed. I heard footsteps. Ethan. He didn't speak right away, just handed me a cup of tea, still warm. I talked to the board today, he said. I blinked. About what? I gave up the New York expansion deal. My head snapped toward him. What? It would have doubled our revenue next year, but it would have tied me to the coast, kept me away from here. I stared. Why? He met my eyes. Because your mother's going to need you, and you'll need someone here who doesn't have one foot out the door. My voice cracked. That deal was everything to you. It was, he said. But you're becoming more. The words landed gently, like snow on skin. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't. Instead, I leaned into his shoulder, letting the wind carry the rest of the conversation away. Later that evening, I sat at my mother's bedside, her fingers twitching in her sleep. You always said love was quiet, I whispered, that it showed up without asking for applause. I took her hand and held it close. He gave something up today, Mama. For you. For me. Her eyes fluttered open, briefly. Then don't waste it, she murmured. I won't. Back at the estate, I found him in the library, where he always seemed most himself, or most lost. He was standing by the window, looking out into the trees. Bare branches scraped against the glass like restless ghosts. I walked in without knocking. Tell me something true, I said. He turned. About what? Anything, he considered. I sleep better when you're next to me, he said. And I panic when you leave the room for too long. My heart clenched. Your turn, he said. I took a breath. I stopped being afraid of you the night you didn't touch me. He closed the distance between us slowly. You don't have to be afraid of me ever, he said. I'm not, I whispered. Not anymore. He touched my hand. Just that. No pull, no urgency. Just a hand over mine, steady. I stepped closer, until our foreheads touched. This wasn't passion. This was presence. This was choosing to stay, even when it hurt. That night, as we lay in bed, closer than we'd ever been, but still clothed in caution, I reached over and traced the shape of his hand under the blanket. You didn't have to give up the deal, I said. I know. You didn't ask me for anything in return. I wouldn't. But I want to give you something anyway, I said. He looked over, surprised. My trust, I said simply. He didn't smile, but his eyes did. There was a softness to our silences. Now, they used to hum with tension, something unsaid pressing between us like a glass wall neither dared to tap. But lately, the quiet had changed, It had become gentler, worn in, like a coat passed down through the years. Familiar. Welcome. I began noticing the little things he did. How he turned down the bed before I entered the room. How he left notes, with his initials on the fridge next to dishes I liked. How his coffee mug always sat opposite mine, even when he wasn't home for breakfast. These were not declarations. These were habits. And habits meant something was staying. That evening, I found him in the guest room, an old space he'd begun to clear out for my mother's short visits. He was crouched over a cedar trunk, lifting out quilts, folding them with quiet care. I hadn't asked him to. He hadn't told me. "You don't have to do that," I said. He looked up, smiling faintly. "I know." He paused. "I want her to feel comfortable here." "She will." He stood, dusting his palms. "She told me something, you know." I raised an eyebrow. She said, "She's learning to forgive. That's the kind of woman who changes a man." I felt the heat rush to my face. "She said that?" He nodded. "She was drinking chamomile, very confidently." I laughed, a real, full sound. And for a moment, he just stared at me, like he wasn't used to the sound yet but wanted to be. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from worry, but from an ache I couldn't name, a restlessness under my ribs. I turned toward him in the dark. "Ethan?" He stirred. "Hmm? Can I ask you something?" His voice came low. "Always. What do you miss most, from before you became this version of yourself?" He was quiet a long time. I thought he might not answer. Then, reading, for no reason. Not to get smarter. Not for business. Just because a sentence was beautiful. I blinked in the dark. I didn't expect that. I used to read under the covers as a kid, flashlight and everything. My father hated it, said it was useless. I reached out, let my fingers find his. "Tell me your favorite sentence." Another pause. Then he whispered. He stepped down, trying not to look long at her, as if she were the sun. Yet he saw her, like the sun, even without looking. I knew the line. Tolstoy. Anna Karenina. I squeezed his hand. "That's a good one," I said. "I want to learn to look at you like that," he said. Without fear. The next morning, I returned from the hospital to find a book on my nightstand, collected, works of Tolstoy. Inside, a note in Ethan's hand. "Start with page 312. I underlined it. I opened it. There it was, the line he'd quoted the night before. Beneath it, a second line, lightly penciled in. "Love is not the cause of suffering. Love is the place where suffering ends." Not Tolstoy. His handwriting. That evening, we sat in bed reading. 2 separate books, 1 shared blanket. Occasionally we'd pause and look up, and when our eyes met, I didn't look away. It felt like something that should have taken years, but somehow had grown slowly between the cracks of what we'd both lost. A trust stitched together, not declared. "I want to take you somewhere," he said, setting his book down. "Where?" "Back." I tilted my head. "To the place I saw you first. Not when we met. Before." I blinked. "There's a diner near, the garment district," he said. "You worked there once. I passed through. You were laughing behind the counter. You wore your hair tied up with a ribbon." I stared. "You remember that?" He nodded. "I remember thinking you looked like someone who hadn't yet been broken by the world." My voice caught. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" He looked down. "I didn't think I deserved to." We visited the diner the next evening. It hadn't changed. Still smelled faintly of fryer oil and cheap coffee. The same cracked tiles. The same yellowed menu board. I wore my hair up. Just because. We didn't stay long. but we shared pie and a slow, familiar smile, the kind that didn't need words to explain its history. As we walked to the car, the wind picked up, and he reached for my hand, gloved, cautious, but warm, and I thought, this is what I didn't know I needed. Not diamonds, not declarations, just this. A man who chose to remember me before I belonged to him, and still wanted me after. That night, we slept touching. Just fingertips. Nothing else. But that contact was louder than any vow. When I woke before dawn, I rolled to my side and whispered, the thing I had feared most. I'm not afraid anymore. I didn't think he was awake, but his voice reached me through the dark. Neither am I. The first snowfall came late that year. It arrived without warning, soft and quiet, blanketing the rooftop of the estate before dawn. I saw it from the bedroom window just before the sun rose, light filtering through the gauzy curtains, catching the gentle drift of snowflakes like a hush falling over the world. I reached for the mug on my nightstand. It was still warm, jasmine tea. Ethan had started brewing it himself, badly at first, too bitter, too strong. But now he knew just how long to steep it, how much honey I liked. I watched him sleep, his breath steady, his face unguarded. There was a time when I thought I'd never belong in this bed, in this house, in this version of life that looked so far from the one I came from. But now, in the quiet blue of winter morning, I saw it for what it was. Not perfect, but earned. And deeply, entirely mine. Mama moved into the house 2 weeks before Christmas. The guest room was warm and smelled of lavender and cedar. Ethan had insisted on having her piano moved in too, an old upright he'd found stored at her care facility, half forgotten. She cried the first time she saw it again. He didn't say anything. Just handed her a mug of tea, then quietly left the room. That night, I found her in the kitchen, slowly peeling apples for pie. You chose a good one, she said. I smiled, drying dishes beside her. He took time. All the best ones do, she turned to me, her voice lower now. And you? You let go of the girl who only knew how to sacrifice. You found the woman who knows how to receive. I swallowed hard. I think I'm still becoming her. Good, she said. Never stop. On Christmas Eve, the house filled with small sounds. Not noise, just life. The creak of old floorboards, the laughter of a neighbor's child delivering cookies. The soft, clumsy notes as Mama played a carol on the dusty piano. Her fingers not as steady, but still full of music. Ethan joined her. Just stood nearby, listening. When she hit a wrong note, he reached over and tapped the right one. Smiling, she smacked his hand playfully, and the moment felt so normal, so beautifully mundane, I almost cried. Later, we sat by the fire, Ethan, Mama, and I, wrapped in mismatched blankets and the kind of silence that holds rather than excludes. Never thought I'd live in a place like this, I said. Mama smiled, her eyes half closed. It's not the place, it's the people. Ethan looked at me then and said nothing, but I saw it. The softness, the offering. His eyes had changed. They used to be cold, calculated. A man watching the world from behind glass. Now they looked at me like he was home. And maybe, for the first time, he was. That night, he found me in the library, curled up with an old journal in my lap. Pages half filled with sketches, old thoughts, and a few tucked-away letters from my mother. "Can I join you?" he asked. Nodded, and he sat beside me. I showed him the letter Mama had written years ago, the one I'd found after our wedding, the one that began everything. He read it slowly, then passed it back. "I think she saw this coming," he said. "What?" "You and me. Not the contract. Not the timing. But the possibility of something more." I smiled faintly. She always saw further than the rest of us. We sat for a while longer, the fire dimming to embers. Then, quietly, I pulled a folded piece of paper from my pocket. "What's this?" he asked. "A letter." "From?" "Me." He opened it. It was short. "You were never the man I dreamed of, but you became the one I needed. I'm not afraid anymore. That's because of you." His hands trembled slightly as he folded it back up. Then, without a word, he kissed my forehead. The first kiss we'd ever shared. Not rushed. Not claimed. Given. The morning after Christmas, I woke to light. Real light. The kind that streams through clean windows and warm blankets and the quiet rustle of someone brewing tea down the hall. I slipped out of bed, feet bare on the hardwood, and followed the smell to the kitchen. Ethan stood at the stove, hair a mess, holding a wooden spoon with a concentration usually reserved for corporate mergers. "Are you cooking?" He turned sheepishly. "Attempting. Scrambled eggs. They're rebellious." I laughed, stepping beside him. "You're holding the whisk like it insulted your mother." He grinned. "I never claimed to be gentle." "No," I said, slipping my hand over his. "But you've learned." He turned the burner off, then looked at me. Really looked. "I want you to know," he said, voice steady, "that I wake up every day choosing you. Not because I have to. Not because of your mother. Not because of the past. But because you made this place, this bed, this house, this life, something I want to come home to." I leaned against his shoulder, letting the moment breathe. "You've changed," I whispered. He nodded. "You did that." That night, I wrote a new letter. This time I left it on the nightstand, for someday, for when doubt returns, as it always does. It read, "We didn't begin in love. We began in fear, in duty, in quiet distance. But we built something, layer by layer, out of kindness, out of presence, out of the space we gave each other to heal. You are no longer the man I feared, and this bed is no longer the one I wanted to escape. This bed is mine. This love is ours. And this home is exactly where the light comes in." He never told me he read it, but I found it weeks later, refolded, tucked under his pillow.